There's a mechanism within your brain right now that holds the key to transformation, not metaphorically, literally. It's called neuroplasticity, and it is the biological foundation of growth, learning, and adaptation. Most people think the brain is fixed, that by a certain age, who you are becomes locked in, your habits, your reactions, your mindset. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Your brain is not a static machine. It's a dynamic, constantly reshaping system that adapts in real time to how you use it. You are not stuck with the brain you have. You are sculpting it every moment, whether you realize it or not. Neuroplasticity is the process by which neurons, brain cells, change their connections. They strengthen, weaken, or create entirely new pathways based on experience, environment, repetition, and, critically, your focus and emotional state. This means that the obstacles you face aren't just problems to be endured. They're catalysts that can rewire you for strength, clarity, and resilience. Let me give you an example grounded in research. When you're in a heightened state, stressed, alert, or emotionally moved, your brain releases neuromodulators like acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. These chemicals flag the brain that something important is happening. In response, the brain becomes more plastic, more ready to change. This is evolution's way of saying, pay attention. This moment matters. Learn something now. So what does that mean for your life? It means every challenge, every painful setback, every uncomfortable moment isn't just a mental or emotional test. It's a neurobiological opportunity. If you lean into discomfort with deliberate attention and effort, you're not just getting through it, you're training your brain to adapt, to grow, and to become more capable next time. The key here is deliberate struggle. Plasticity doesn't happen automatically. Your brain doesn't change just because time passes. It changes when you engage effortfully, when you focus on learning or improvement in the midst of adversity. That's when circuits rewire. That's when identity starts to shift, not because you wished for it, but because your nervous system was put under tension and had no choice but to evolve. Think of this like lifting weights. The strain, the resistance, the breakdown of the muscle, this is what creates growth. In the same way, neural strain, pushing your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors outside of automatic patterns, is what grows mental toughness and adaptability. But here's the part most people overlook. Neuroplasticity has windows. It's most powerful when you're alert and emotionally engaged, but it consolidates during deep rest and sleep. So if you're constantly grinding, stressed, overstimulated, and never recovering, you're blocking the second half of the plasticity equation. You're activating change, but you're not locking it in. That's why sleep is not a luxury, especially in the adaptation process. During sleep, especially slow wave and REM sleep, your brain literally replays key moments from your day. It reinforces what mattered, what you focused on, what you emotionally tagged as important. That's how plasticity becomes permanent. So when you're struggling to overcome something, whether it's emotional trauma, a career crisis, or physical burnout, remember this. You are not fixed. And the brain does not care how old you are. If you apply focused attention, effortful repetition, and proper recovery, your brain will change. That's not motivational fluff. That's neurobiology. And what's more, the more you engage neuroplasticity, the more capable you become of using it. It's a feedback loop. Effort breeds capacity. Change rewires the systems that made change possible in the first place. There is no version of long-term resilience that doesn't involve this process. You can't just read about growth or talk about it. You have to go through the neurological fire. You have to put your brain under tension and let it reshape through effort, sleep, and repetition. You were born with a brain designed to adapt, and not just adapt to comfort, but to pressure, to uncertainty, to the unknown. The real superpower isn't intelligence or talent. It's this mechanism, neuroplasticity. Because it means that even when you're broken, even when you're at your limit, your brain is still learning, still sculpting, still responding to the signals you send it through your actions. In a world where so much feels uncertain, one of the most powerful lessons you can internalize is this. While you may not control the events around you, you absolutely control how you respond. Not in some abstract philosophical sense, but in a concrete biological sense. You control your state, and that changes everything. Your state refers to the real-time condition of your nervous system, how alert or calm you are, how focused or scattered your thoughts feel, how prepared or paralyzed your body is to act. Most people go through life letting their state be dictated by the environment. A stressful email, a missed opportunity, an unexpected conflict. The external world hits and the internal world reacts. But you're not a passive passenger. Your brain and body are equipped with tools to regulate internal state on command. And doing so fundamentally alters how you handle adversity, pressure, and challenge. Let's start with breathing, something you do tens of thousands of times per day, but likely without awareness. Your breath is a direct line to your autonomic nervous system. Shallow, rapid breathing tends to amplify stress, triggering the sympathetic fight or flight response. But when you intentionally slow your exhales, especially when you double the length of your exhale compared to your inhale, you activate the parasympathetic branch, the system responsible for calm, clarity, and composure. This isn't speculation. Research from top neuroscience labs has shown that deliberate control of respiration is one of the fastest and most reliable ways to shift your internal state. One powerful technique is the physiological sigh. 2 inhales through the nose, 1 long exhale through the mouth. This calms the nervous system within seconds, even during moments of high anxiety. Now pair that with posture. Your body sends continuous feedback to your brain. If you slump your shoulders, lower your head, and narrow your chest, your nervous system interprets that as vulnerability, fatigue, and defeat. If instead you stand tall, pull the shoulders back, open the chest, you send a signal upward to the brain, I'm prepared, I'm safe, I'm in control. This is called interoception, the brain's interpretation of internal signals from the body. Your visual field is another lever. When you're stressed, your pupils constrict, your eyes lock into tunnel vision, and your brain becomes hyper-focused on the perceived threat. This narrows not just your visual awareness, but your mental options. You literally see less, and that affects your decision-making. By consciously widening your gaze, relaxing your eyes, taking in the periphery, you signal safety to the brain, shifting it from reactive mode to strategic mode. This allows you to re-engage parts of the prefrontal cortex responsible for planning, self-awareness, and long-term thinking. Add to that the role of self-corrected attention. Your ability to choose where you place your mental spotlight shapes your emotional response. In stressful moments, if you fixate on what's out of your control, the delay, the rejection, the judgment, you increase the sense of helplessness. But if you shift attention to what's actionable, even if it's small, you start to reclaim autonomy. This is where a simple mantra becomes useful. Control the controllables. Can you control what just happened? Maybe not. But can you control your breath? Yes. Can you control your posture? Yes. Can you control your visual focus, your inner dialogue, your next step? Absolutely. Controlling your state doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means giving your body and brain the best possible conditions to respond powerfully. It means recognizing that your internal environment drives your external effectiveness. The most successful people don't wait to feel in control. They create control by managing their physiology first, then moving forward with intention. When you're in a regulated state, you're not just calmer, you're cognitively sharper. You make better decisions, access memory more efficiently, process feedback without emotional distortion. Your perception changes. Your threshold for stress rises. You start to see challenge not as chaos, but as data, something to be decoded and navigated. And this doesn't take hours of meditation or perfect conditions. It takes awareness and intervention. 30 seconds of deep breathing, a posture shift, a conscious gaze expansion, a reframe of attention. You don't need to fix the world to move forward. You just need to own the systems within you that were built for adaptation, control, and resilience. Has been misunderstood. It's been labeled the enemy, something to avoid, suppress, or eliminate. But biologically, that's not what stress is designed for. Stress is not inherently bad. It's a signal, an internal alert system designed to prepare you, sharpen you, and push you toward action. The problem isn't stress itself. The problem is let's go beneath the surface. Stress is a neurochemical and physiological response to perceived challenge, unpredictability, or threat. When your brain detects something that demands more from you, whether it's a real danger or just a social situation that feels intense, it activates a set of systems designed to increase alertness, mobilize energy, and narrow focus. These include the release of adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, and dopamine. These chemicals do not exist to harm you. They exist to mobilize you. They increase heart rate, elevate breathing, dilate pupils, and direct blood flow to your muscles. They also prime your brain for learning and memory formation. In other words, stress places the mind and body in a heightened state of readiness, not just to survive, but to adapt. But here's where most people go wrong. They interpret stress as a malfunction. Something's wrong with me because I'm anxious. I shouldn't feel pressure. The reality is you feel pressure because your system is recognizing that something matters. The physiological signals are data. They are saying, pay attention, prepare, this situation is important. If you change the way you interpret that signal, you change the outcome. Research has shown that when people reframe stress as preparation, their performance improves and the damaging effects of stress on the body are reduced. Cortisol still rises, but it does not degrade performance or health in the same way. Why? Because the psychological context changes the physiological impact. This is known as stress appraisal theory. Your beliefs about stress, whether you see it as enhancing or debilitating, actually modulate how your body processes it. If you believe stress is toxic, your body responds as if it's under threat. If you believe stress is useful, your body processes it more efficiently, using the surge of energy for action and cognition. Think of stress as a biological signal flare. It's your body telling you that you're at an edge. That edge can lead to burnout if ignored or mismanaged, but that edge is also where neuroplasticity becomes most active. In states of focused stress, your brain becomes more receptive to change. It flags the situation as meaningful, worthy of attention. That's where growth happens, not in comfort, but on the edge of effort. The key is to differentiate acute stress from chronic stress. Acute stress, the temporary spike in adrenaline when you step into discomfort, is useful. It sharpens your reaction time, deepens your focus, and helps embed new learning. But chronic stress, sustained, unresolved, and unregulated, wears the system down. So how do you convert stress from toxic to productive? First, by developing stress literacy. Understand what stress feels like in your body, the tight chest, the shallow breathing, the mental fog or racing thoughts. These aren't defects, they are markers. They tell you where you are on the arousal curve. Second, regulate, not suppress. Tools like controlled breathing, visual field shifts, and deliberate physical movement can redirect stress into focus. For example, taking 1-2 minutes to perform deep diaphragmatic breathing during a stressful moment not only calms the nervous system, but also sends a signal to the brain, I'm in control. This challenge is within my capacity. Third, use stress as a cue for action, not avoidance. When your system alerts you to discomfort, move toward it in small, deliberate steps. This activates the dopaminergic system, not just in response to success, but in response to effort. That's a critical distinction. Your brain rewards progress, not just outcomes. When you show up to the stress instead of running from it, the brain recognizes it as a mastery signal. Finally, reflect post-stress. This is often missed. After you've faced the hard thing, take time to mentally debrief. What worked? What didn't? What did you learn? This reflection consolidates the experience and rewires your nervous system to become more efficient in future stress encounters. It converts experience into embodied knowledge. One of the most persistent myths in personal development is the idea that you need to feel motivated before you act, that you have to wait for inspiration to hit, for your mood to shift, for the right energy to show up. But neuroscience tells a different story. Motivation is not the spark. It's the result. The real ignition comes from one thing: action. Inside the brain, motivation is governed largely by a neurochemical called dopamine. But dopamine isn't just about pleasure or reward. It's about anticipation, pursuit, and movement toward a goal. And here's what most people miss. Dopamine doesn't flood the brain when you sit around thinking about what you should do. It releases when you initiate movement, especially when that movement is directed towards something uncertain, challenging, or meaningful. This means that if you wait for motivation to take action, you're relying on a system that was never designed to work that way. The human nervous system is structured so that the act of moving forward, even in small steps, is what starts to unlock motivation. You don't feel like doing the hard thing, but you do the first rep, the first sentence, the first uncomfortable conversation, and suddenly your neurochemistry shifts. The brain starts to release signals that reinforce the behavior, telling your system, this matters, keep going. This is called the action-reward loop, and it's a biological truth. Dopamine is released in response to effort, not just achievement. That's why the people who seem the most disciplined often aren't relying on willpower. They've learned to build momentum by acting before they feel ready. And over time, their brain adapts. The discomfort of starting becomes tolerable, then familiar, then automatic. Let's look at this through the lens of behavior and identity. When you act, especially in the face of resistance, you are sending a signal to the brain about who you are. Every action creates a piece of evidence, not just for the world, but for your own nervous system. I'm the kind of person who does the work regardless of the emotion. Over time, these signals compound. They become the scaffolding of identity, and identity drives long-term behavior far more reliably than motivation ever will. So the first step is to lower the activation threshold. That means removing the idea that you need to feel good to begin. You don't. You need to move. And the movement doesn't have to be heroic. In fact, the smaller and more manageable the first action, the more likely it is to bypass internal resistance and get the dopamine system online. Think of it as flipping a switch rather than waiting for lightning. For example, you don't need to run 5 miles. You need to put your shoes on. You don't need to write 1,000 words. You need to open the document. These small actions initiate a cascade of biological and psychological changes. They shift attention, they change posture, they start the loop. Now let's talk about what happens after the first action. Once you begin, your brain begins releasing more dopamine, which enhances focus and energy. You start to feel slightly more engaged. You gain access to cognitive resources that weren't available when you were in a frozen, unmotivated state. This creates a feedback loop. Action creates progress. Progress generates dopamine. Dopamine reinforces action. And with each loop, your threshold for resistance decreases. This approach isn't just about discipline. It's about aligning your behavior with the mechanics of your brain. The dopamine system is built to reward effort and forward movement. And critically, it also builds anticipation. When you take consistent action, your brain starts to predict the reward of progress. You begin to crave the process, not just the result. This is how sustainable motivation is built, by stacking actions until the system begins to expect and even desire the work itself. The mistake most people make is assuming they need clarity, confidence, or emotional readiness before they begin. But the truth is, those qualities are byproducts of engagement. They emerge through movement, not before it. You act first, then clarity sharpens, confidence builds, energy follows. This is the biology of resilience. It's not about waiting for the ideal conditions or the perfect state. Human beings are wired for goals, not just psychological goals, but neurological orientation toward targets. Physical, emotional, cognitive. We function at our highest levels when our brain and body know what they are aiming for. But there's a crucial sequence to achieving anything meaningful. You must set your vision, and then you must narrow your gaze. Let's break that down biologically. Vision, both literal and metaphorical, is deeply tied to how the nervous system regulates focus, motivation, and energy. When you define a vision, a goal, a purpose, a direction, you activate a part of the brain known as the prefrontal cortex. This is your executive function center. It helps you simulate outcomes, imagine long-term rewards, and make decisions based on future consequences rather than just immediate gratification. But setting a vision is only step one. A compelling vision provides orientation, but it's not what drives execution. The real transformation comes when you narrow your focus, both mentally and visually. That narrowing of focus tells the brain, this matters now. Prioritize this. Ignore distractions. From a neuroscience standpoint, this process is closely related to the activity of the frontal eye fields and the locus coeruleus, which together regulate attention and alertness. When you visually fixate on a specific target, whether it's a spot on a wall, a cursor on your screen, or a line of text, your brain begins to release norepinephrine. This chemical sharpens your focus, suppresses irrelevant information, and increases your signal-to-noise ratio. That's the scientific way of saying it helps you lock in and get more done with less wasted energy. This is not just about productivity, it's about alignment. You are at your most powerful when your vision and your gaze are working in harmony. Too much vision without action becomes fantasy. Too much narrow focus without purpose becomes burnout. The sweet spot is the sequence. Define your target, then shift into tunnel vision and take the next step. It's worth noting that your visual system is a direct extension of your brain. In fact, about 40% of your brain's surface area is involved in processing vision. This isn't a coincidence. Nature made vision the dominant sense because it plays a central role in how we interact with and adapt to our environment. When you change your visual behavior, you change your cognitive state. Think of what happens when you walk into a new environment and you scan the room. Your pupils adjust. Your visual field expands. You're taking in a broad context, that's panoramic vision, and it's associated with relaxation, creativity, and exploration. But when you get serious, when it's time to execute, your gaze narrows. That visual focusing tells your brain it's time to mobilize resources, filter distractions, and engage goal-directed systems. This is why elite performers across domains, athletes, musicians, special forces, surgeons, train not just their bodies and minds, but their ability to control focus at will. They've conditioned themselves to switch from vision mode to action mode, from strategy to execution, from scanning to locking in. It's not just mindset, it's a physiological shift. The same principle applies to your daily life. You might have a big vision, build a business, transform your health, change your relationship with fear. That's your North Star. But once it's set, you must return to the present. Ask, what does the next measurable action look like? And then zoom in on that one thing, not the whole mountain, just the next rock in the path. This shift, set the vision, narrow the gaze, also changes how dopamine is released in the brain. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation and pursuit, spikes not just when you achieve goals, but when you move toward them. And when your focus narrows, your dopamine system becomes more efficient. You feel more drive, more clarity, and less mental noise. Most people reverse the process. They stay in perpetual wide-angle mode, thinking, planning, ruminating. But action lives in precision. Progress happens when you trade abstraction for specificity, when you stop scanning and start executing. Even your physiology confirms this. When your gaze is diffuse, your stress levels tend to decrease, but so does your goal-directed drive. When your gaze tightens, alertness rises. Your whole system shifts into a mode built for effort, problem-solving, and progress. This is how you create traction. You define the large-scale outcome, the purpose that drives you, and then you collapse your field of vision down to the next unit of work. That unit might feel small, but it is precisely where adaptation begins.